Welcome everyone. Today we will start looking into how the Sunbird as a digital infra is built, ensuring that it can actually serve to various learning needs, irrespective of the domain or irrespective of the learning environment. So if we if we refer back to some of the sessions which you must have gone through. If you remember, what we talked about was that learning services needs can be fundamentally unbundled into three scenarios: learn, help learn, manage learn, which are interconnected. And these three scenarios engage different actors in fundamentally three personas, which is a learner, instructor, and administrator. And fundamentally, learner goes through the learn cycle as instructor is going through the help learn cycle to support the learner. And while these two are happening, the administrator is engaged in the manage learn cycle. And this, if we go further down, each of the three scenarios of learn, help learn, and manage learn fundamentally are built of four user actions: learn, interact, do, and sense. And these four user actions are same whether we are talking about scenario learn, help learn, or manage learn. Although each of these actions, the meaning of each of these actions will be different, the context will be different, what and why that action is being done, and that depends upon on the action taken in context to a particular scenario and persona. And hence we are referring these four user actions as meta verbs. And as we discussed earlier, this is something which is applicable to any learning environment. So what does that mean and how that gets contextualized? Let's take an example to demystify this framework and really understand how it's applicable. I'll take an example of K-12 education, and let's start with the situation where student in K-12, which is the primary use case of K-12 education, is the learner. So in this context, applying the framework here, student is an actor playing the persona of learner going through the learn scenario, while the student is going through the learning. The teacher acting as an instructor is helping the learner to learn. And as the learner and the instructor, as the student and teacher in this scenario is in the learning interaction, the administrator, which in this example are the education department officials, are overseeing the overall learning environment and managing the learning environment and going through the manage learn scenario. So what do we mean by that? Let's go deeper here. Let's take example, let's take the first learn scenario. So when we are saying a K-12 student going through a learn scenario, what exactly is happening? The student learns, and the learning can happen either sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher, or the learning can be happening by watching a video or reading some content at home. And as all of us know, with the COVID disruption in the schooling for last 1 year, I think the reality of learning at home is becoming more and more real. Not just during the pandemic, but also moving forward. I think the coexistence of both will become much more systematic and much more adopted. And as the student is learning by listening to a teacher or an expert through a video, there's another action the student goes through is asking questions. Now, the asking questions can be from his or her teacher, or asking questions can be from their peer, other fellow students. So it's a peer conversation, which takes the understanding of that knowledge to the next level for that student, based on what they heard from the teacher, gets further, clarified. And as that is happening, the next action the student does is what we refer as do, which is nothing but doing practice questions either at home or in school, or doing homework, or or a project assigned to the student by the teacher to be done. The fundamental purpose is that how the student apply the knowledge they have gained through the learn and interact, and really deepen the understanding and the application of that knowledge is the context here. And again, the do part can be at home, can be it in school. The physical boundary is not the limitation. And as this is happening, there is a sense going on. So student take mock tests on their own, or they may give exams which are structured and scheduled. And as a student, as they are doing it, they themselves review their own progress through those exams and tests, and potentially also try to understand their own learning gaps. So this cycle is again, it's iterative, and it doesn't mean that it is done sequentially, because in a classroom environment, the learn and the interact and the sense might be happening simultaneously in the same period, and sometimes intermixed with the do also, where teacher may assign certain questions in the classroom, quick practice. So it doesn't mean it is always sequential, it is intertwined in between each other. And if you look at this cycle of learn, interact, do, sense in context of learn scenario, and in this example of that student, these actions, each of them can be either self-driven, a student sitting at home, figuring out what to read on their own, searching the content, either searching books or searching on the internet or any digital platform, or they are guided by the teacher. A teacher can guide the student because the student is in the classroom, or teacher can guide the student remotely, as many teachers have been doing for last 1 year, where the coordination with the student remotely is happening, and teacher is still guiding the student what to learn. They also interact with them through WhatsApp or other platforms for interaction, or they may also even assign practice questions or homework, and then sensing, although not being done very I think systematically remotely, but a little bit of that also is happening, maybe not formal exams, but a portion of that is also happening. So the point is, it can be self-driven, it can be guided by teacher, whether in person or remote, or it can be a bot based. So when I say bot based, I'm fundamentally referring to a system driven action. What do I mean by that? For example, a state board may decide to roll out a systematic program where they have a schedule of what to be learned every week. And let's assume the student or the parent of the student registers to that service, and hence they automatically get a set of uh, content to learn, to do, or to sense in a systematic way. So in one way, the system becomes a partial teacher, partially because the system is guiding the student what to do, rather than student figuring out on their own. If I take it further, as this learn scenario is going with the student, what is teacher doing, and how are they interconnected to each other? This teacher also goes through the cycle of learn, interact, do, and sense. And for teacher, the learn means preparation for teaching. It may be watching an instructional video, going through their teaching manual, or watching a webinar, preparing the lesson plans and the material they may want to use for the next class or the period in a physical classroom environment, or even preparing for what they would like to remotely give to the student to either learn, do, sense. So it's fundamentally preparation just in time. It doesn't mean that they are trying to understand the pedagogy, but it's all about preparing for your next teaching cycle or teaching period. And as that learn is happening, teacher also interacts with the students, which is basically the counter of the interact, which we just discussed from a student perspective, where the questions asked by the student gets clarified, Teacher also moderate the peer conversation among students. And at the same time, and then we'll connect to that, the teacher themselves might also have questions to ask from the education department officials in context to the teaching methods, the teaching effectiveness, the challenges they may be facing in handling a particular teaching environment. And the do part is fundamentally teacher preparing the practice questions, the homework, and the projects which get assigned to the student, as we also discussed that in the learn cycle. So it's a counter set for that, teacher helping the student to learn, and hence has to do certain preparation to make that happen. And then as we go to sense, it's the sense where teacher prepare exams, give exams for the sensing part, and as those exams are taken, as those tests are taken by the student, teacher using the data which it generates to understand what's the progress of the learner, where have they done well, where there are the gaps, and hence based on the gaps the teacher is able to initiate the cyclic improvement process of learn, interact, do in a iterative way, which again drives the iterative cycle of learn for the student as well. Now again here the same rules apply. The you teacher actions can be self-driven, can be guided by the education department or by a system. Now, what do we mean by that? Uh, Education department may systematically publish relevant content for the teacher to learn, for the teacher to prepare for the various classes or various learning they are trying to do in coming weeks. At the same time, the department may also provide certain standard tests, certain exams, practice questions, and it can be structured and communicated in a defined timelines that this week you need teach this, and you can use this, and this is how you can teach. So it becomes guided by the education department, and it can go intertwined with teacher being self-driven. Teacher is doing their own stuff, they're figuring out the lesson plans, they're figuring out their own teaching material and method and exams and practice questions. At the same time as the this is happening, it can also be system driven, where if the system is becoming more intelligent in terms of understanding the needs and all, based on the usage of the system of the teacher in this scenario of learn, interact, do, sense, the system can also prompt the teacher based on the past experience, based on the preferences given by the teacher, what might be relevant suggested material for them to use. And as we go through this, as we see the learn and the manage learn, the middle two circles are happening, intertwining and interconnecting with each other. The education department officials are looking and going through their own cycle of learn, interact, do, sense. Fundamentally, the purpose is to manage the learning environment, ensuring that the physical environment available or the virtual environment available is helping this teacher and student to enable into effective learning and help learning. But at the same time, also ensuring that the practices and the relevant support which is provided to the teacher is also effective to fundamentally making sure that the student's learning is happening as one would like to. What does that mean for the education department official? So let's walk through that. So for a education department official who's managing the learning environment, the learn fundamentally means they may be going through their own set of material, might be an administrative manual in terms of the day-to-day operations they might have to do. It might be a video how to mentor the teachers, because when the teachers face a challenge, they reach out to the relevant experts and the pedagogues, which are part of the education department officials, or even the mentors, which are part of the official, the department, which help the teacher to guide in terms of the challenges they're facing. So how do I, as an education department official, mentor my teachers? What are the best practices? I may want to brush up that. And I may also want to go through how do I do the next operation or the action I need to do on the ground. How do I conduct a survey? How do I conduct an assessment? Because I'm trying to understand what is the current situation of the learning environment, how is the learning happening between the teacher, and student, and what is the environment look like from a physical infrastructure as well. And at the same time, I, as an education department official, might also be conducting certain improvement programs to improve the learning environment. So how do I even do that, right? So again, it's just in time, how to understanding so that I can do a better job of my next my next action or my next focus area I need to execute. The interact is the counter to the teachers having questions in terms of their cycle of help learn, and the education department officials support the teachers to guide them to answer their queries, moderate the peer conversations where best practices can be shared across teachers in a particular situation or in a particular geography. At the same time, the education department officials may also be interacting among their peers, because in context to their own role of managing learning environment, they themselves may want to collaborate and understand the various best practices, the solutions to the problems they might be facing, trying to hear from their peers who might have an answer, who may have a best practice which may help them to conduct their job effectively. And as that is happening, they are also engaged in actually executing certain improvement projects on the ground based on the situation, based on the assessment data which they see in the context of the geography they are managing from their jurisdiction perspective. And as this is happening, this is again in cyclic sequence of sensing, because for education department official to manage the learning environment, it's equally important for them to sense what is the current state of the learning environment, what is working, what is not working, and that creates a cyclic cycle of improvement, and hence the need to sense, the need to do surveys, the need to do the assessment of student, teacher, and the school environment in context to the physical learning, and probably assessment of the remote environments when the schools are disrupted. So understanding the physical learning environment, understanding how the learn and the help learn cycles are working effectively, where are the gaps teacher might be facing in terms of uh, helping the learning of the child, or what is the learning levels of the student, and through this data trying to understand the interdependencies on the various aspects of the learning environment, and then accordingly taking actions to improve that, and again getting into the cyclic improvement of learn, interact, do, sense. So it becomes a uh, cyclic improvement using the data and improving from where it was before. And again, it can be again same, be self-driven, be guided by the department, or if there's a digital platform used for certain actions being supported based on the uses of the system, if it becomes more intelligent through the AI and the use of data, be able to help and actually guide the education department official to do their job effectively. Now, if you look at these three, what have we talked about? We really talked about how learn, help learn, and manage learn as three scenarios, three interactions. They interact across personas, primarily keeping the focus on the K-12 student learning. And as this is happening, this is also dependent upon two other aspects, or intertwined with the two other aspects. One is how is the teacher capacity is building over a period of time, because if teachers ability to teach better as the basic professional skills improves, it will have a direct impact on the improvement of the students learning. And that may not be the only factor, but it's a very important factor. At the same time, the ability for the officials to do an effective job of managing the learning environments. How does the professional capacity building happens for the officials, right? So that they can be more effective in sensing and improving the learning environment, also will have a direct impact on the student learning. So, and if we apply the same principles of learn, uh, manage, learn, and help learn, three scenarios, in context to teacher capacity building, in context to official capacity building, they will be applicable in the same way as we walked through in the student learning. The three scenarios are applicable with the four actions, user actions in terms of learn, interact, sense, and do are also equally applicable. What changes, as you can see on the right side, is that in context to teacher capacity building, the teacher becomes the learner. The SCRT folks or the experts from the educational department becomes the instructor for the teacher, and the education department officials becomes the administrators. And the primary focus here is how do we improve the skills of the teacher as a learner. And the intertwining of those three scenarios are still applicable in the same way. The four user actions are still applicable in the same way, although the context changes. And same is true when we look at the official capacity building at the bottom, where again the learner now here is the leadership, the education department leadership, whether it's a headmaster, whether there are various resources, field team resources on the ground, uh, while the instructors will be the either the officials who may come from the department, whether the SCRT or the department experts, who primarily are experts in the administrative operational areas, or some of them may also rely on some of the central or the national level experts to help them guide. So they become the instructors, and the administration is still done by the education department, because fundamentally education department is ensuring that these three different network of interactions are effective, so that the fundamental learning of the student is becoming more effective. So what we really, if you see here, what it really means is that it's not just about learn, help learn, and manage learn being three scenarios intertwined, but it is actually interconnected network of interactions across personas, where the network of these interactions might be done in parallel, keeping a particular learner in mind, while the actor in that particular situation might be different. So the same model actually applies, and all these three in this example are intertwined. They have interdependencies on each other. The data which gets generated, what is working and what is not working, right, should be and can be leveraged to improve each other, fundamentally focus on improving the students' learning. So that's a fundamental. Um, this has to be equally supported by the sourcing for learning, teaching, and administrative assets. And as we recollect, when we walk through the scenario, in each of the scenario, for each of the user action in that scenario, there is a certain reference material which is required for the learner to learn, for the instructor to teach, and for the administrator to manage. And that itself is also an important aspect, which has to again intertwine with these three networks, along with how do you source the asset. And if you source the asset, what is the ecosystem you're engaging to source that asset? Is it a set of pre-selected users in this example of education department, or you're going beyond? Are you engaging the ecosystem of community, NGOs, and private sector? And this again is intertwined with these three networks, because based on what content you source also has an impact on how effectively you're able to drive each of these networks of learn, help learn, and manage learn in context to driving the student learning or teacher capacity building or official capacity building. Uh, so fundamentally, we applied the same thing in other learning environment contexts beyond K-12, and it seems to be applicable. The fundamental point what we're saying is the three scenarios with four user actions, the meta verbs, the three personas are applicable to any learning environment, be it educational, K-12 or otherwise, be it professional or be skill building. It can be self-driven or can be guided, as we discussed that briefly also in the K-12 example. And this intertwined with the asset sourcing through an ecosystem model. And the ecosystem is defined by the adopter of this model in context to their learning environment, is what is applicable to learning environment. You can actually apply this construct, this framework in any learning environment context. And this is what Sunbird enables. Sunbird enables platform for interconnected learning networks. What we just walked through is what Sunbird allows the adopters to instantiate platforms leveraging Sunbird for solving their problems in context to their learning environment and enable interconnected learning environments. In case of K-12, as we saw, there were basically three: one focused on teacher capacity, other focused on student, versus the third on the education department officials. In another context, it may be two, it may be three, maybe any number, but but the same construct is applicable, and hence you can actually create interconnected learning environments so that your overall focus of prime objective of learning can be effective. And to do that, Sunbird fundamentally looked at building common and configurable building blocks for 5 primary nouns, 5 meta verbs with 3 modes of action. So when we talk about 5 primary nouns, fundamentally it is the organization, user, asset, tool, and data, all the 5 in blue as you can see here, with enabling 5 actions of learn, do, interact, source, and sense. So as you can see, we added the 5th verb, source, to reflect the sourcing need beyond the learn, interact, do, sense, which we walked through in each of the scenarios. And this has to be enabled in a way where you can actually also enable 3 modes of action, which is it can be individual driven in their own context, in their own persona, to drive their own set of actions of learn, do, interact, sense, or it may be human guided. In our example, teacher was the human guide for the student. The administrative official was a human guide for the teacher, or it is system assisted. In a way, if you look at system, as the AI and the data, learning through the data becomes, more effective. In one way, system starts to complement the human guide. In context to the student, it will be the teacher. The teacher gets effective support from the system. And in the context of teacher being the learner, the system helps the administrator to help the teacher learn, right? So it becomes complementary in nature to the human guide. And with that, a lot of challenges which we face in different learning environments, for example, the non-availability of teachers in a particular scenario, or the differences, different languages, being taught or being understood between teacher and student. This can actually start solving some of those problems and helping the human guide in their context to be more effective. So it's just complementary in nature. And this also, of course, depends how well the data is generated, how well the system evolves, and how artificial intelligence also evolves and becomes more effective in the context of learning. So it's a long haul, but fundamentally also looking at how system can support individuals not only actually human guided, even the self-driven, to be effective in the other two modes. Now, if I go and look at this big picture, when we talk about these 5 nouns and these actions, one thing is very important is that user can have multiple roles with different organizations. It is not a one-to-one relationship. Just to give again an example in a K-12 context, a user might be creating a content or contributing a content to one organization, but might be a teacher with another organization. So, there is no boundary here, right? We have to have a system which is flexible and allow user to engage with multiple organizations in different roles, in different contexts. On the right hand side, as we discuss about that how the system assistance can become more effective to even drive or complement the self-drive and the human guide. It is very important for the system to generate data. And then if you recollect, we have emphasized and we discussed about how Sunbird allows to build the telemetry as a basic foundational piece. And today you will actually hear in more detail in the subsequent session, after the session is done. So each asset, the asset and the tool both emits data on a continuous basis. And then certain tools are used by the user to sense, which again leverages the data as an underlying fundamental principle, because that is a key part. That is what drives the cycles of improvement, drives the learn, interact, do cycle in an iterative way. So that's a fundamental, foundational piece from a solution construct perspective, which is built into the system. Let me go forward and let me take it further down. Now, if we have to solve these problems, and in the learning environment, and as we talked about, if you have to really enable these scenarios with the fundamental nouns and the fundamental actions, right? The actions are meta. It is very important that as we build these assets, as we build these tools and all, they're done in a way where we break it down into fundamental common building blocks which are configurable, which are which can be stitched together so that a particular context can be addressed through a pure configuration. And hence it is important to define the assets in the most generic way, and this is what we have basically defined. I think some of these are discussed in detail in prior sessions. I'm not going to go into the detail, but fundamentally assets are of two types: consumable assets and non-consumable assets. And consumable assets again are broken down further into collections, content set, question set, program, action set, event set, right? That basically enables any learning environment to roll out the relevant content with certain behaviors. And these non-consumable assets are actually used to make the consumable assets more effective, whether it is taxonomy to define who's the consumable asset meant for, or what does it contain, or dial codes, which is a very effective way to bridge the connect between the physical and digital and allow a one-stop, one-click discovery. When we go further, what does the organization mean? Fundamentally, at this moment, looking at two types of organizations: a sourcer organization, an organization who's looking to source the assets, and the contributor organization who might be contributing towards a request or from a sourcer organization. And when we talk about users, and we discussed that, right, there are three personas: learner, instructor, administrator. And in context to supporting the sourcing of the assets, a contributor is another persona, which we have to keep in mind to enable. And when we go into the data, fundamentally there are two types of data. One is the platform data, which gets generated as the instance of a Sunbird is instantiated and run. And then you have telemetry data, which we discussed. And fundamentally, we're talking about three types of telemetry data: the asset usage, the tool usage, and the user feedback, which is leveraged effectively along with the relevant platform data to sense. If I go further down, if you look at verbs, and we walk through the cycle of learn, interact, do, sense in each of the scenarios, what do they mean? If you have to enable these meta verbs, what are the next level of verbs which we need to enable, which are generic, which are configurable, which can enable these meta verbs? And when these meta verbs are executed in context to a particular persona in a scenario, that can be enabled with minimal or no code change. And then if you look at learn fundamentally means discovering an asset, consuming an asset, earning a credential, or participating in an event, online event or offline event, and ability to review the progress. And similarly, you can see interact is nothing but engaging in a forum, on a platform, and ability to review the progress. Do is fundamentally looking at supporting the execution of projects on the ground, and then also ability to create assets in context to when the do is done by a teacher or an administrator. This the example in K-12 can be creating a project to be assigned to the student or a practice question. And sense again goes through the similar cycle. As you can see, you can start seeing that even at the next level of actions, the actions are common, right? Across learn, interact, do, sense. And if we start, and that's the beauty of it, as you start breaking down the building blocks to the next level of common building blocks, the commonality, the common theme comes. And that's what gives the power to Sunbird. By doing that, we're able to create generic configurable building blocks which are stitched together to enable a scenario, which is stitched together to enable a particular experience in context to a particular persona, an actor playing. If I take it further, as we discuss, the human guided and the system assisted, and as you see here on the left hand side, a human guided, what does that mean, right? The ability for a teacher to create a cohort of small set of students which the teacher has to teach in the K-12 environment, or ability for an administrator to create a cohort of teachers which they need to guide, and ability to enable that full loop of learn, interact, do, and sense with this smaller cohort. Now that happens, that happens naturally when the student is in the classroom with the teacher. How do you enable that when that physical environment is not available, where the student or a teacher in this example are not in the same place, right? Is what the guide, the group as a underlying capability is trying to do, and enabling the full loop, as you can see here, through that, without the physical limitations of being to be present in person. While on the other side, the assist, this is again, it is evolving as we are working on Sunbird. But one of the ways is enabling a chatbot, enabling a chatbot where any user persona can come in, ask queries, and able to get their answer. So, whether it's a structured query or unstructured query, how do we take that first step towards system assisted? But also, on the right, you can see another construct where that is something which is still work in progress, but where the ability for a teacher or ability for a administrator construct a program, construct, for example, in K-12, that as the classroom teaching is happening, we are also rolling out this blended program as a state for the students, where they can actually learn simultaneously or practice simultaneously at home with the parent as a guide, or self-driven by a student, where the parent or the student gets a systematic set of content or material to drive the cycle of learn, do, and sense in parallel to the cycle which is happening by the teacher in the classroom, right? So how do you structure that, and the students or the parents can actually subscribe to it, and hence they also get assisted by the system, simultaneously also doing the learn, cycle in at the home. And if you combine this with the guide, it can actually go beautifully, where the teacher can also become the intertwining between the learning happening in school, learning happening in home. And again, this is a K-12 example. The same can be applicable in a professional learning environment or a skill building environment. And again, if you see here, same set of verbs, right, are coming and common. The verbs which you saw, just to kind of take you back, the verbs which you saw in the learn, interact, do, sense are actually coming in the guide, are also coming in the assist, because fundamentally it's a different mode of action to enable the same loop of learn, interact, do, sense. And then if you look at source, the source fundamentally is broken down into 4 key actions. The seek, the organization which is looking for assets, put out a seek, a request. Individuals or organizations contribute, and then this has to get into a cycle of improve. And improve is driven either by the source or organization alone or in collaboration with the contributor. As you can see on the right hand side, improve is driven by each of them and in collaboration. And this is pretty much driven by the users, because you create an asset, but how do you improve? That cycle can only kick in when you start looking at the usage data, when you start looking at the feedback, and hence breaking down each of these into the next level of verbs to really make it modular. I will not walk through each of them, but that the objective is break down every action so that you are able to come up with a common building block which can be built in a configurable way. And to enable all these user actions, when we look at the set of tools which we are enabling, there are set of tools which are user facing, which truly enables various scenarios and user experiences, which are enabled using pluggable tools, whether they're editors, players, user accounts, org management, batch scheduling, which are further enabled and intertwined with the widgets. When we talk about interaction through a discussion forum, when we talk about enabling the guide through the groups, they will be done in context. A context might be a particular collection rolled out as a course. The context might be a discussion done in a particular group created by a particular teacher for a set of students, or a particular a professional who's guiding a set of individuals in their particular industry, in the professional development context. So how do you build things in a way where it can be embedded and configured in a particular context, and then all of this enabled with the set of fundamental building blocks of microservices. And you've also seen this in earlier sessions, also in a specific examples of whether it was a focus on content otherwise. So that basically draws the land, for the underlying tools, which enables all these actions and scenarios for various mode of actions. And again, these are generalized and configurable, so that the configuring of using the same set of tools, configuring them in different scenarios to enable different experiences is enabled. So again, bringing it back all together, Sunbird enables platforms for interconnected learning networks by enabling 5 primary nouns, by enabling 5 meta verbs with the 3 modes of action, which is built on the generalized set of needs, which we talked about being the 3 scenarios, the 4 primary user actions, and the 3 personas combined with the sourcing need, which has to be done in parallel. So I'll stop here and probably take a few questions. So Monica, if you can help me understand if there are any questions.
Ronnie, yes, we have a few questions. First question is, if I am building an education solution, how do I leverage this abstraction to better design my solution?
Yeah. So So see, the way you can use this abstraction is if you use the same framework in your context, and really go through. Let me actually, since you asked that question, I can actually use the other. So you basically go through the construct of doing the similar cycle, and you can actually, in fact, leverage the nouns and the actions which we have defined, and go through the same iteration. What are your primary interactions, in your learning environment context, and see. And I'm hoping that the three learned, help learn, and manage learn scenarios will be applicable. So go through that cycle and see who are the primary actions and playing actors, and what are the personas they're building, personas they're playing. And then from that, if you broke it down with the same construct, you will realize what are the various user experiences I need to enable in these particular scenarios. How do I enable it? And then use the building blocks of Sunbird to configure to enable that. That would, is what I would suggest. And as you do that exercise, I'm sure you may find areas which the original construct may not have thought through, and you will be able to expand it beyond what we have done, and you may be able to find certain areas of gap as well. So that's what I would encourage you to do. But fundamentally, how do you break down your need into these building blocks, and really then applying, how do you enable those solutions by configuring the Sunbird? And if there are certain pieces which are not part of Sunbird, how do you extend Sunbird to enable that for your platform?
Thank you, Alok. The next question is, there is a challenge wherein a platform caters to all interaction scenarios and actors. So the platform ends up being built for everyone, but not for one actor specifically. How do we ensure that each actor gets exactly what they need?
Yeah, it's a very important question. So the piece is, there's a balance which you need to provide. One is, how do you enable the interaction? It's a very important aspect, because if you only focus on providing relevant content, providing relevant actions to student in isolation in K-12 versus teacher versus administrator, the real problem solving doesn't happen, because each of them are working in silo, but each of them are interdependent. So hence the need to enable the scenarios simultaneously, enabling your network of those scenarios simultaneously is important, so that one data generated in a particular scenario can be used to improve the other scenario, or one set of data generated in a network of these scenarios is able to drive the other network of scenarios. In our example which we took, how does the student learning network data generation can be used to improve the teacher capacity building, as an example. However, having said that, the fundamental question which comes back is that, okay, that is great, but how do I make sure that the experience of that particular actor is not getting difficult? And that's where you have to pay extra attention, that when the user experiences are enabled, how do you simplify the life of an actor playing a persona, so that they only so that they get what they want in an easy, fast manner. And that's where the tooling which you do, the interface whichever you create for the user to engage with the system, you have to think through that. How do you leverage users preference declarations? How do you enable the user the agency to tell the system what is the persona they are playing, what are they interested in, and hence simplifying the discovery, make the discovery contextual to them. That will be very, very important, and equally important in addition to the platform, which enables these interactions.
Um, Next question is, interactions really helps one learn and practice. Shouldn't we look at the interaction as a horizontal layer outside the loop? What is the advantage of looking at it as part of the loop?
Okay, can you repeat the question? The line was a little choppy.
Sure. Interactions help one learn and practice. Shouldn't we look at interactions as a horizontal layer outside the loop? What is the advantage of looking at it as part of the loop?
So see, you can look at each scenario. I'm assuming when you say interaction, you refer to scenario. You can look at learn scenario, help learn scenario, and manage learn scenario in isolation, right? The reason it is important to look them interconnected and holistically is because when the student is going through the learning, let's say there is a certain gap in the student learning. Now, if you're not able to correlate to the cycle of the teacher, help learn scenario, there is a possibility that students learning is dependent upon because teachers capacity or skills in a certain area are weak, or there's a possibility that either you know teacher is focusing on it, but he's or he she is not able to get the appropriate help from their peers or from their from the corresponding their mentors. Now, if you enable these interlink, scenarios where data can be leveraged across each other, your ability to find how to solve the problem, becomes effective because the problem solving is not cannot be done in isolation of a learner and the instructor and administrator. They are intertwined, and hence the need to look at that together.
The next question. The interaction themselves and the zoomed out view of these interactions really simplifies this super complex framework with so many actors involved. Do you have any example of how this construct was executed at scale?
Yeah, so this construct, I would say, have we executed the whole thing? Not yet. That's still a journey. I mean, when I say we, of course, we as Sunbird, contributor community are enabling the digital infra for others to use to execute on the ground. But having said that, I think there are examples who have leveraged Sunbird, whether it is Diksha or other professional development learning environment instances where they are slowly adopting it. So if I use the K-12 example of Diksha, they are looking at enabling the learned help learn and manage learn the scenarios being activated where as a student has the access to relevant content. They will be able to interact with other students or interact with their teacher through a group, or in addition and in parallel, states rolling out structured teacher capacity building programs, and again leveraging the data which the system generates to see how do they improve the students learning by doing the targeted intervention in context to improving the content, for example, for student, or improving the content for the teacher learning, or even figuring out what should be the next focus of the teacher training. But again, I think it's a journey, and it's not a small journey. And I think it'll take time, but I think there are instances who are already adopting and enabling these intertwined scenarios to solve the problem of learning.
The next question is, will the school headmaster's actions be categorized as manage learn or help learn?
Yeah, so if you ask, okay, this is what, if I look at headmaster today, a headmaster may be playing multiple personas. Why I say so? A headmaster might be also teaching a particular subject in a lot of situations, and a headmaster might also be managing the school. So in my view, a headmaster, given the situation of a headmaster as an actor, uh, will be playing a persona of instructor and an or administrator. But the prime responsibility as a headmaster is definitely one of the prime responsibility of as a headmaster is ability to manage learn ability to manage the learning environment, and their jurisdiction is fundamentally at school level, right? They are responsible for ensuring the learning environment in that school is effective, ensuring that the learning is truly happening, helping uh, both their teachers and students, and also ensuring the physical environment is effective. And hence, manage learn is a primary, one of the primary focus of theirs in the role of in the persona of administrator.
Our last question is there a reason teach hasn't been considered to be a primary verb?
As sorry, can you repeat the last thing? Is what?
Is there a reason
Mhm.
teach hasn't been considered to be a primary verb?
Okay. So see, teach again. We can always. There are many verbs, right? So fundamentally, you can always debate what is the right verb. Whether one is the better verb than the other, and that improvement can, of course, also happen. That I'm sure that as we, as Sunbird Collective, as we move forward, and as we are enhancing, Sunbird with multiple contributors coming together, I think this framework, these verbs and nouns, will also improve and enhance. But having said that, see, the way we looked at it is that the act of teach. See, teach is probably a much larger verb which is subsuming many things. The act of teach is what is help learn. So in one way, teach can be equivalent to a scenario of help learn. What does the help learn mean, right? Because you have to break down, the word into more logical building blocks. The other reason we didn't use teach word rather than as teach word, we said help learn, because teach has a very strong connotation. Because when you talk about teach, the strong connotation and perception which comes is you're talking about education, you're talking about K-12 or higher education, whether it is college or PhD and all, right? But when you talk about professional development, when you talk about skilling, usually teach word is not used there. So because of that very strong context to that word, we prefer to use help learn, which is I think is a more generic and can be applicable anywhere without with a strong connotation to that, was the reason. But yeah, I mean, in my view, help learn is equal to teach. But again, teach is more specific.
I think we can conclude this session. Thank you so much, Alok.